Transferring wealth successfully starts with asking yourself questions that will give your family a better life now and for generations to come. In this podcast, financial professionals John and Michael from Beech Financial Group guide you through eye-opening questions to help you discover the truth about your wealth. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to The Truth of Your Wealth with John and Michael Parise from Beech Financial Group. I'm excited we are going to start a series here based on a white paper that they have written, and it's going to be available to anybody who goes to their website and would like to download it. It's very interesting reading. It's really great perspective into the mind of these gentlemen and what they do with their prospects and their clients when they help them. And so it's 10 questions basically, and we're not going to do this series all in a row. It'll be sprinkled in throughout this next year in total, but we're going to start one at a time, just going through these, and I'm pretty excited about it. So let's get started. Good afternoon, guys. How are you doing?
Hey,
Fine, Eric. How are you?
Hey, Eric. Good. How are you doing?
Doing great. I'm excited to get into this. I know there's 10 questions. I have not seen all 10 questions. I know the first one, but really the title of this paper is 10 Eye-Opening Questions to Protect Your Wealth. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So, Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you. Can you get us started with question number one and kind of where it came from and what needs to be answered here?
Sure. Well, the first question that we're going to talk about is actually the first one in our white paper, and it's one that we frequently talk with business owners about. It's one of our questions that we ask them right when we meet them, and the question is, if something happens to you tomorrow, tell us what happens to your business. And we think that is a really important question that, unfortunately, many business owners don't think about or ask themselves, because most of the time they're spending all of their time in the business, working on the business, and not really thinking about what happens to both the business or their family should something happen to them. And it really does depend a lot on how the business is structured, but that's the question we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I think any business owner is just going to tell you, hey, wait a second, I'm just trying to get this thing off the ground, man. I can't be thinking about what happens if a bus hits me. But again, we just can't have that mentality. We can't have that, stick our head in the sand and not worry about it because there's other people involved, whether it's your family that you need to take care of or you've got business partners that are in the business with you. That's something that has to be addressed and should be addressed, right at the get-go. So how do you address it?
Yeah, I'll jump in here now. Eric, the solution to these, this dilemma is typically what options they have to look at. We find when folks look at ways to exit their business, sell their companies, bring kids into the business, or some exit, they don't think through how to do it because they don't understand clearly what their options could be. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we help them discover is we go through additional questions and talk about what their understanding is in an exit strategy and what that means to them. So I'll give you an example. We have a client on the West Coast. It's a fourth generation company. When we asked that question to the three siblings, they looked at us like, we don't know. We don't have a solution to that. Mm-hmm. We all loved our dad. We took over the business. We're all enthusiastic. They bear their heads in the business every day. When Michael and I stepped into the case, when we discovered all their potential problems, they were shell-shocked because they would have lost the company if we didn't fix some of their problems. Wow. But along the way, we gave them solutions to look at. One was building a management team to support the growth of the company. One of the other solutions is having more control of a key man situation. For example, each one of the siblings had a key role in the organization, and they specialize in a certain area. We talked about building a management team at each one of those functions to develop an exit for them to leave before retirement age of 65, because it's a very stressful business that they were in. So they were stressed to the highest level possible. So we talked about stepping away from the business, sitting on a board, working in the business with the executive team, but not being all hands on. And they really like that idea. So we walked them through different solutions, and 4 or 5 years later, we're still working on those processes, but they're clear now on how they want to address it. Or let's put it this way, they're clearer. They still haven't made a final decision, but that's part of the process. It takes a while to determine the best end game.
Yeah, it's almost like what I visualize is the business owners, or definitely those three siblings, we're kind of facing a fire hose, and you come along and you're just cranking it down until it's just trickling, saying, hey, look, let's take this a little bit at a time. Let's look at what these possibilities are and what these, solutions could be, and just kind of giving them a chance to breathe is what I kind of picture in my mind. What are some of the succession challenges that these businesses are facing?
Well, I think it really depends on the type of business that you're dealing with. So in this case that my father just brought up, that's a pretty interesting one, because it's both a multi-partner business, but it's also a family business at the same time. So there's really unique challenges with that. But if you look at a multi-owner business as an example, there's specific challenges that you may have with partners in terms of the roles that each partner may take in the company, how are ownership interests either shared or distributed. If something were to happen to them, like let's say one were to pass away, there's buy-sell agreements that become involved in that. So multi-owner businesses have their own unique challenges. And then, as I mentioned, family businesses do as well, in terms of if you're either trying to, in this case, work with siblings or bring in children into the business. That is a huge task that families really have to be proactive with and get ahead of, because the success of the company and in this case the family is really at stake if you don't do that properly.
Eric, when you look at the stats, only 4% of privately held companies make it to the fourth generation.
Wow!
But that's an issue that a lot of these generational families have to worry about. And what causes that is the disconnect on those goals and objectives, family issues that they need to address. Everyone has different approaches to how they want to exit the business. And so it's a very complex environment. And having a good team of advisors, like a good legal team, a good accounting team, and a good financial team, like what we deliver at Copper Beech, it helps coordinate those issues and puts these projects on the table. And quite frankly, we address it every quarter with our families, and we have forced them to address it. Matter of fact, they call us the biggest pain in the necks in their lives, because we make them address these issues because they need to be resolved, and we're very passionate about getting it done for them.
Yeah, you have to bring it to the forefront. And I was thinking when Michael was talking, this is a double-edged sword in this scenario, because you've got multi-owner and it's multiple family members that are the owners, and that's got to be a very difficult minefield, if you will, to navigate. And you're the ones helping them do that. How on earth do you help to preserve the relationships while bringing them just factual information that, hey, this is something you have to do, whether you are comfortable with it or not? This is a necessity in this scenario. And how do you bring everybody on board so the relationships are maintained?
In this particular case, they all had a very good relationship with one another, so that made it that much easier. But you're right. You can imagine that not every family has that same level of congeniality with one another. So it does become difficult. And in terms of what we do, I think when you look at a business, it's really sitting everybody down at the table. And I think you would agree, Dad, being just straight shooters. I mean, these sorts of decisions as it relates to the business, you can certainly have your disagreements, but especially with multi-owner businesses, it's really about being fair with everybody. It's not designed to favor one partner over the other. It's really how can we design this in a way that everybody is treated fairly for the services they provide for the company and their relative ownership percentage that exists.
Got it.
Yeah, if you look at some of the three probably focused areas that we usually address, is there's three exits to a business. One, they could sell it to a third party. They could sell it to their employee through an ESOP strategy, or sell it to their management team. All three of those are very complex in nature. Some are more tax efficient than others. So it really depends on, as Michael said earlier, if there's kids in the business, an ESOP might not work. If there's no succession to a business, a charitable piece might be a way to go. So there's a lot of different solutions to those issues. And again, Michael's point is very well taken. Getting them to sit at the table together and talk about each one of these strategies helps us to get a feel on which way they're leaning. Like this firm on the West Coast, as an example, they're leaning towards an ESOP strategy. They want to sell their company and do it on a tax advantage basis. And we're in the process of helping them build a management team to have that exit 5 years from now to an ESOP. So there's a whole litany of things that have to happen along the way. And again, the reason why this fails is because people let things fall through the cracks, and all of a sudden someone accidentally passes away, or someone gets ill, or someone becomes disabled, or someone leaves a position at a top level in the company. That has huge impacts on the success of that enterprise. So you have to stay on top of it, is my bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. Not saying that it's any simpler. We've talked about multi-owner and we've talked about family and all that in that first section to answer this question. But what about like just a single owner, a sole proprietorship, or I guess that's what it would be called? Just one person that owns it. Is it any easier?
That's a big challenge, as you can imagine. Really? Those individuals have particular succession challenges that they need to address. In some ways, it's easier, and in some ways, it's more difficult. But if you compare that to a multi-owner business, most of the time, and we could get back to how we look at these types of agreements, shareholder agreements, if you'd like, but most multi-owner businesses have some form of shareholder agreement, operating agreement that sort of deals how the succession of the business will flow. But if you're a sole owner of a business, you really don't have that. And so that puts a lot of pressure on the family in particular, because the question then becomes, we always ask this, is what's your company worth without you being there as the owner running the shop? Now, some businesses maybe have key personnel that kind of take the brunt of the operational duties, but when you're really the person running the shop and something happens to you, what ends up happening to your shares or interest in the business is that gets passed on to your spouse, typically in your estate plan. And most of the time, at least from our experience, the spouse really has no capability to run the company whatsoever. And that puts a lot of pressure on the company itself and its value, therefore, if it were subsequently sold, because a willing buyer is going to look at that company and say, well, it's really not worth what it was before the owner passed away. Now it's worth less because he or she's no longer here running it. So that in and of itself, on its face, is a pretty unique challenge to sole owner businesses. Yeah,
and I hit them pretty hard with that question as well, as it relates to the value of the company. Michael brought that up. You spend all your years building an enterprise, maybe 20 years building a company. Let's say it's a decent net worth company. By failing to have an exit strategy or something in place, the value is lost significantly to the family, not just to the spouse. It affects kids as well. So we protect that sole business owner, typically with a key man design that says you at least buy enough life insurance to cover that value to protect that asset in case something were to happen. That's an easy solution to the problem, but that's not the only solution. So there's a lot of different ways to protect the value, but a lot of our business owners are stubborn. They think they could resolve those issues on their own and figure it out, and we have to reel them in a little bit. But when we get them to sit down and address the issues, they get real concerned that they need to fix this.
And another issue, just to expand upon that, with sole owner businesses, this is a case that's going back a few years that we worked on here locally to us, and it was a sole owner of the business, and he was concerned that if he were to pass away, he had some key executives that helped him run the business that presumably would help his spouse continue to run the business and perhaps sell it in an orderly fashion. But there's no guarantees around that. So if you look at if the owner of a business who's running it and then passes away, and again, the spouse may not understand how to run the company, that spouse is going to rely very heavily on the key employees that may be in the business. Well, there's some instances where what incentive do those key employees have to really act as an owner but not actually be the owner? They really have not a lot of upside in that type of decision. So this particular business owner put in place some phantom stock plans that we helped them design along with their legal team that helped sort of give them a little bit more skin in the game if the owner were to pass away, that they wouldn't just jump ship and be poached by a competitor or some other company that was local to them.
What's a phantom
pretty unique case.
Yeah, what's a phantom stock plan? I don't mean to interrupt, but I've never heard that term before. Phantom stock plan. What's that mean?
Yeah, privately held companies can issue stock options like a public company can. So it's a deferred compensation strategy that allows a company to issue values of shares of the company to a key executive in a phantom arrangement. And that means it's not a real share of stock. It's a share of value. So, for example, if I wanted to give Michael a bonus for growing Copper Beech successfully, I could say to Michael, I'll tell you what, Michael, I'm going to value that share of stock today at $10. I want to grow the company to this number. Let's say I want to grow from 2 million to 5 million as a value. And if you help me increase that value from 2 to 5, I will give you an increased share of value in that arrangement, or more access to the transaction of a sale of the company in your pocket from a benefit standpoint. It's like a retirement plan in a way.
Okay, so and I'm assuming that would go into, not in your scenario, but the other scenario that Michael was saying, that would be implemented upon the owner's death if that happened.
Or sale of the company.
Sale of the company.
So in this particular instance, with this company, he was concerned again that if he passed away, these executives would jump ship, and so he put in place this phantom stock type of arrangement where he said that there was a certain percentage of the company's sale value that would go to these executives if they stayed on board to help his spouse end up selling the company. So it's kind of golden handcuffs is the term we use. It sort of gives them some skin in the game to help, assist in that process.
Okay, that makes much more sense. I thought it was something that started once he passed away. In case he passed away, then all of a sudden this phantom stock showed up. But I get it. It's put in place.
It's designed ahead of time.
It's a little complex, and there are different designs to it, but it's a great question.
Got it.
One of the things we want to respond to here is that when you think of it, that sole owner of a business, that business is like another child to them. They spend all their time, pretty much most of their life, running that business. Spend more time with the business than they do with their own children most of the time. It's very hard for them to let go of it. It's really difficult.
I bet.
So the strategic thought of, what do I do with this asset? It's my child. It's near and dear to me. I've been in this building for 20 years. How do I let it go? And they usually don't. And they usually suffer with a bad decision by all of a sudden passing away prematurely and having all this problem sit on the desk of the spouse. So it's a challenge to get them to take action, but that's a challenge for every advisor to help their client in that situation.
Well, one more piece we'd like to touch on is specific to family businesses. And Dad, I think this comes up pretty regularly in terms of, you may have a sole owner of a company. He or she may be really involved in running that company, and they have a child that's also involved who may be coming up, maybe out of college or starting their career, and maybe aren't necessary or isn't necessarily prepared to really take the reins should something happen. Let's talk a little bit about how families deal with that issue and how we can help them with that. How do we typically address that?
Yeah, I just relate to Copper Beech, my firm. Michael is my succession to my business and my practice. And through the last 10 years, we've been developing strategies on keeping Michael in a growth mode of understanding how to financially run the company, how to develop a marketing strategy, how to develop a relationship structure with our families that we work with, how to build a good team of support around him in case I disappeared tomorrow. And we've successfully have accomplished that. I don't think it's going to be perfect, but you have to work on it all the time. And Michael will tell you, we talk about it all the time. Mm-hmm. As it relates to other firms we work with, we have a firm locally here where the gentleman it's a very unique business, and he has a son that helps him run it. He's the rainmaker, the owner. He travels the world buying merchandise. He truly believes that his son can take over the business. When you talk to the family members and other advisors, they don't agree. So now we're working with him very closely to help develop his son or protect his son with a management team or a specialist to come in and help that company continue a growth track, if just in case the owner would pass away tomorrow. He's receptive to it. He's listening to us. But again, it's like, letting go of a vision that he has, how he wants to run the company. It's very difficult at times. We act as psychiatrists most of the time. Michael will tell you, we try to counsel them through letting a go scenario. It's time to get other people involved with your success. And it's only going to protect your wife, and it's going to protect your siblings, or your children, to make sure this enterprise continues.
Yeah, I think that to add to that, it's really a design question, because how does that transition take place, number one, and who's really at risk if it doesn't work out properly? So in this particular case, the case that we're referring to, this client, where he was going to actually have the company benefit his spouse and his 3 children equally, but he was going to have one child running it, which presents some unique challenges if that child's not able to continue to maintain the success of that company like his father was. So there's all these different dynamics that come into play with how that really is designed and protected for the family, just in case that doesn't work out. We think it will work out in this particular case. It just may take time, but you never know. Again, we always try to plan for the worst case scenario, and you obviously hope for the best.
Yeah, one of the pieces in that particular case, he has a credit line, a very substantial one, because he buys a lot of merchandise. And if something would happen to him as the owner, they would call that note. Well, how does that note get paid off? If you're not producing revenues because the rainmaker is no longer operational, and the son in this particular case isn't capable of running the show at this point in time, and the bank all of a sudden says, I need my loan paid off, it causes some very financial stress to the family. So a lot of these intricate pieces start popping up in these discussions, and our job and our role typically is to discover how he structures his business, what debt he has on the table, what has to be taken care of in what priority, and to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.
I think that this is really where, again, business owners aren't necessarily trained to think in this way. That's really why families hire us, because we could sort of push the envelope on having them pay attention to that a little bit more.
And we sure do that.
Because again, they're used to running their businesses, and they're not necessarily thinking about all these other exposures and potential pitfalls that they have that we think about, because that's our role.
Well, I think it's important to mention also that, like you said, you're working as therapists in a way, because you've got all sorts of emotions involved. You've got a father, and I'm just going to use this as an example. You've got a father who, brings his son into the business. There's some excitement there. Oh man, I'm so excited that you're going to be a part of this. And buddy, you can do it. It's going back to baseball. It's going back to football. Get out there. You can do it. You can do anything, right? And then the son has been, in the business for 6 months, and they don't have these conversations of what happens if dad passes. Dad may be thinking, he can do it. I did it. He can do it. No problem. And son's going over there. Oh, good God Almighty. There's no way. I mean, Michael, I would say that you would be a great voice for this. When you were working at Copper Beech for the first 6 months, do you think you were capable of running the entire show? If your dad was, yeah, I mean,
no. I mean, and that's the thing. It's really, you grow into that. And obviously you can't replace experience. No matter how smart or intelligent you may be.
Yeah.
And in my case here at Copper Beech with my father, and in this other client's case, it was a similar thing. I think he's a very talented young man, but he may just not be ready for it yet. I think
just
that
maybe
if everything goes according to plan, 20 years he'll be fine. But it's, again, we can't plan. If we knew when that was going to happen, this would be easy. We don't. So we try to, again, plan for the worst case and hope for the best, of course.
Yeah, and the other piece of the case, as I'm thinking through the key issues, is if something happened to this particular client, the son would still keep running the company, but the wife would inherit the shares. She has no knowledge about how to run the business.
Yeah.
So the son would probably dictate to mom what he thinks, how it should be run, and how's that going to work?
Yeah.
So you have a lot of complex issues here, and things are not going to work out well. And why would you do that and lose all that value to the family because you didn't want to do some planning? And that's really where we kind of push a lot.
And this is where getting it into the family meetings that we go through with our families. So a lot of this gets communicated to really the entire family, so that everybody's on the same page. Because in this particular case, you have one child that's running the business. The other two are not in this case. So that dynamic you have to address as well. So communication's key. And that's where the family meetings that we do with all of our families annually really comes into play to help with that. Just helps kind of get everything on the table.
And I know there's no simple answer to the question, right? If something happened to you tomorrow, what happens to your business? We have gone over a ton of different things, strategies, ways you guys help. But in a nutshell, since we're running out of time, what should people do?
Well, first start planning now. I don't think there's ever a lot of times we come across businesses that want to try to do succession planning, let's say 5 years before they think they're going to sell their company or transition their company. We often find that's a little too late. You can do a lot of creative things tax-wise and succession-wise if you start early, as well as obviously doing some of the more family dynamic issues that we talked about too. So that's first. I would also say if you're a multi-owner business, review your agreements So if you have operating agreements, review how those work, how they're triggered, valuations of your company, whether you have adequate funding to help in that buyout if it would ever occur. There's a whole host of, we didn't really get into that, but we could have a whole podcast on that, I would say. But those are the two things off the top of my head that I would think to do. That.
Yeah, my quick answer is, and it's a little more stark, is when you open your company, you should start with the end in mind. You should plan from the first day you open the business on what's going to happen to it.
Yeah.
You might have a vision for it, but those what if scenarios pop up accidentally, being disabled, potentially passing away, potentially, or a sudden issue with a health that you can't go to work every day. Those are all factors. So when you open up an enterprise, you have a responsibility not only to address those issues right away, but as you hire employees, the impact you have on their lives is dramatic. We have companies that we have buy-sell structures that are so bad, they're going to affect 50 employees. So if the two partners end up having a war on an issue and they close the company down, it affects 50 families. So we get very intense about making sure this stuff gets done correctly.
Got it. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for listening to the Truth of Your Wealth podcast with John and Michael Parise. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when John and Michael come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks so much for listening today. For everyone at Copper Beech Financial Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Truth About Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Copper Beech Financial Group. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
Securities offered through American Portfolio Financial Services Incorporated, a member of FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory and financial planning services offered through American Portfolio Advisors Incorporated, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Copper Beech is an unaffiliated entity of APFS and APA. Any opinions expressed in this forum are not the opinion or view of American Portfolios Financial Services Incorporated, APFS, or American Portfolios Advisors Incorporated, APA, and have not been reviewed by the firm for completeness or accuracy. These opinions are subject to change at any time without notice. Any comments or postings are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or a recommendation to buy or sell securities or other financial instruments. Readers should conduct their own review and exercise judgment prior to investing. Investments are not guaranteed, involve risk, and may result in a loss of principal. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Investments are not suitable for all types of investors.